December 29th, 2015, a modified Suzuki RM-Z450 cuts across a dirt track in Japan. Its rider locked in, focused, flying toward a jump. His name is Kuraudo Toda, and he's doing what doctors said he'd never do again: ride. Years earlier, a crash had left him paralyzed from the chest down, but Cloud didn't stop. He rebuilt his body, rebuilt his bike, and now he was defying fate one more time. What happened next would shock witnesses, devastate the motocross world, and raise questions that still haunt the sport today. This isn't just a story about a rider, it's about obsession, resilience, and the fine line between unstoppable ambition and irreversible loss. Before Kuraudo Toda became a symbol of courage and tragedy in the motocross world. He was simply a young man with a fierce love for speed, gravity, and the grit of competition. Born and raised in Japan, Toda developed an early passion for bikes and the culture surrounding motocross. While specific details of his childhood remain private, those who knew him say he was hooked the moment he first climbed onto a bike. Dirt, gears, and gasoline quickly became his language of expression. By his early 20s, Toda had become a respected figure on the Japanese motocross circuit, competing in the All Japan Motocross Nationals and catching attention for his raw speed and technical precision. But it wasn't long before he set his sights beyond his homeland. Motivated by a hunger to push himself further, Toda ventured into one of the most competitive arenas in the sport, the United States. In the early 2000s, he began racing in AMA Supercross and motocross events, the gold standard for motocross athletes worldwide. The tracks were tougher, the crowds were bigger, and the competition was unforgiving, but Toda thrived. While he never reached the celebrity status of top-tier American pros, those inside the motocross community knew his name. Riders spoke of his discipline, mechanics admired his work ethic, and fans, especially younger ones, were drawn to his quiet intensity and jaw-dropping air control. Eventually, Toda found a new challenge: freestyle motocross, FMX, a discipline less about speed and more about aerial mastery. It was a world of backflips, whips, and daring leaps, where riders transformed their machines into extensions of their bodies mid-air. In this space, Toda truly soared. His fluid style, combined with near-surgical execution, earned him admiration from riders around the world. But with greater risks came greater consequences. In 2008, during a private test session for Suzuki factory bikes, Toda's journey took a life-altering turn. Attempting a massive jump, something went catastrophically wrong. He lost control mid-air, and the crash that followed was brutal. By the time emergency responders reached him, he had broken numerous bones, and most critically, he had suffered a spinal injury at the T5 vertebra, located in the upper thoracic region of the spine. The diagnosis was grim: permanent paralysis from the chest down. For most athletes, this would have been the end, a career closed, a dream shattered. But for Kuraudo Toda, it was just the beginning of another chapter. Confined to a wheelchair, he now faced a devastating reality: what he could no longer walk, let alone compete. But as his body began to heal, his resolve only strengthened. As friends later shared, Toda never once spoke about giving up. Instead, he began researching recovery techniques, studying the limits of paraplegic mobility, and committing to hours upon hours of daily physiotherapy. His father became his closest ally, assisting him through a grueling regimen of strength-building exercises that would eventually allow Toda to operate a motorcycle using only his arms and upper body. By 2013, against every odd and expectation, Toda was back on a bike, a heavily modified Suzuki RM-Z450. The machine was tailored to his new reality: a reinforced safety bar to keep him upright, harnesses to lock his body in place, and hand-operated controls for acceleration, braking, and shifting gears. Without the use of his core muscles, crucial for balancing and maneuvering a motocross bike, Toda had to reinvent his riding technique. He practiced tirelessly, starting with slow laps, then short jumps, and eventually full laps at race pace. Those who saw him ride in this new form say it was like watching defiance in motion. The very act of riding was no longer just a performance. It was a rebellion against fate. By 2014, Toda had reclaimed his place in the sport. Videos of his riding circulated online, showing a man fused to his machine, floating through the air as if gravity had lost its hold on him. He even began training to qualify for one of freestyle motocross's most iconic events, the Best Whip contest at the X Games, a competition judged not just on distance or execution, but on style, amplitude, and innovation. To qualify, he needed to master one of the most complex and dangerous tricks in the book: the whip. It's a move that demands total body control. The rider must flick the bike sideways in mid-air, then bring it back around in time for a perfect landing. For a rider without functional legs or core muscles, this seemed unthinkable, but Cloud Toda had never let the impossible stop him before. And on December 29th, 2015, he would return to the 774 compound in Japan for yet another practice session. A familiar track, a familiar jump, and one last push toward the dream he refused to let die. He had already survived the impossible once. He was ready to do it again, but this time, something was different. Something no one, not even Cloud himself, could have prepared for. Day that began with hope, ambition, and quiet confidence would end in devastation. For Kuraudo Cloud Toda, it was another step on a path he had paved himself, one made not from convention or caution, but from grit, defiance, and the will to ride again despite paralysis. That day, he arrived at the 774 compound, a well-known motocross training facility located near Tokyo. The track was a familiar one. It had seen countless hours of his sweat, pain, and progress. The goal was simple: continue refining his technique on one of the most difficult maneuvers in freestyle motocross, the whip. Unlike backflips or Superman grabs, the whip doesn't rely solely on risk or spectacle. It's about finesse. It's a move that separates seasoned veterans from amateurs. It requires the rider to launch off a ramp, pitch the bike sideways in the air, and then realign it just in time to land smoothly. It was a staple in FMX competition, and performing it with style and amplitude was a necessary step if Cloud wanted a shot at competing in the X Games. Despite his paralysis, Cloud had mastered it, sort of. For the past several weeks, he had been practicing the whip repeatedly. Not on dirt, but into a specially built foam pit. Foam pits are standard in action sports for practicing new tricks. They're designed to break falls safely and prevent injury while giving athletes the ability to push their limits. The pit at the 774 compound was filled with massive blocks of polyurethane foam, spongy, dense, and shock absorbing. These pits are used by BMX riders, skaters, and FMX pros alike to rehearse maneuvers that would otherwise be too dangerous to attempt cold on solid ground. But what most people don't realize is that foam pits, while designed for safety, come with their own risks, especially if flammable materials are present, especially if hot engines and fuel systems are involved, especially if the person landing can't quickly remove themselves from danger, and that would prove to be the fatal factor on this day. Cloud's customized Suzuki RM-Z450, equipped with hand controls and a specialized seating harness, was modified to perfection. It was a marvel of engineering. Built to give back freedom to a man robbed of movement. It allowed him to accelerate, shift gears, and stabilize mid-air with only his upper body strength. But the very things that enabled him to ride also made it impossible for him to dismount in an emergency. That afternoon, Cloud lined up for another attempt. Those present later recalled that the energy was light. Cloud was smiling, relaxed, even a little playful. After all, this wasn't new territory. He had hit this jump countless times. Same approach, same takeoff, same air. He throttled forward. His bike surged ahead, tires ripping through the dirt as he rocketed up the ramp. As he launched, his signature style emerged. In the air, the bike kicked out to the side, perfectly horizontal, before Cloud used his arms and weight to reel it back in. The landing was smooth, perfect, but within seconds, everything changed. Moments after the tires sank into the foam pit, smoke began to rise, then fire. At first it was small, barely visible, but polyurethane foam is highly flammable, and underneath the foam block sat an active dirt bike engine, radiating heat. Experts later surmised that the combination of hot engine parts, residual fuel, and a slight spark, possibly from the exhaust or electrical components, ignited the surrounding foam. Within seconds, the pit turned into an inferno. Cloud, strapped tightly to the bike, had no chance of freeing himself. Panic swept the compound. Friends, family, one can only imagine the terror. The realization that the same pit that had cushioned so many landings had turned into a blazing cage. His body, which had already survived one form of trauma, was now helpless in the face of another. There was no escape route, no fail-safe, And the worst part? It didn't have to happen. Fire safety protocols for foam pits had been known in the industry for years, especially after similar, though non-fatal incidents in action sports. Some training compounds overseas had already begun switching to fire-retardant foams or installing emergency suppression systems. But at the 774 compound, these precautions hadn't been implemented. There was no fire suppression system, no fireproofed foam, no rapid extraction plan in place for disabled riders. It was a perfect storm. By the time emergency responders arrived, the pit was engulfed. The fire had consumed everything inside. It took them hours to fully extinguish the blaze and remove what was left of the structure. When the flames were finally out, the truth was confirmed. Cloud Toda was gone. He had fought harder than most humans ever will, not just to survive, but to live on his own terms. And in his last moments, he did what he loved most, soared through the air on a motocross bike. But the very tools that helped him rise, the straps, the modifications, the foam that caught his fall, became the very things that sealed his fate. And so, on that winter day in Tokyo, the motocross world lost not just a rider, but a symbol of what it means to refuse defeat, a symbol of what it means to rise after being broken, a symbol of what it means to chase your dream even when the world tells you it's impossible. In the wake of Kuraudo Cloud, Toda's tragic death, the motocross world stood still. To many, he wasn't just a rider, while he was a symbol of what it means to refuse limitation. From the moment he returned to the track after paralysis, Cloud didn't just rewrite his own story. He redefined the boundaries of possibility for disabled athletes everywhere. Videos of him tearing across tracks, drifting through corners, and soaring over jumps in a specially modified bike spread quickly across the internet, inspiring awe in both motocross fans and non-riders alike. His legacy wasn't built on podium finishes or medals. It was built on resilience. He became a beacon for those told they couldn't. For those who had fallen, broken, or been left behind, his life served as proof that with enough drive, the impossible could be bent to your will. In the months after his passing, fans and riders around the world paid tribute to Cloud. Races were dedicated in his honor. Social media lit up with hashtags and tribute videos. At several motocross events in Japan and the US, riders placed decals on their bikes with his nickname, Cloud, etched above angel wings. Others adopted safety reforms inspired by his story, pushing for improvements in foam pit construction and equipment for disabled athletes. But beyond the racing world, his impact went further. He became a subject of case studies in sports rehabilitation, and his commitment to defying the odds was highlighted in documentaries and media features about adaptive sports. His father, who had helped him recover, spoke at safety seminars. Together, their story became not only one of tragedy, but one of triumph, the kind that sparks change. Cloud Toda didn't just ride again, he flew, and in doing so, he taught the world that passion, when paired with purpose, is an unstoppable force. Kuraudo Cloud, Toda didn't just ride again. He refused to surrender. He reimagined the possible. He burned through fear and limits until fire quite literally caught up with him. His final jump was more than a trick. It was the culmination of years of pain, defiance, and discipline. But it also exposed a tragic truth that the very systems built to catch him failed him. So we're left with more than just grief. We're left with questions. Could this have been prevented? Why weren't proper fire safety protocols in place? And in chasing the dream, how far is too far? Cloud never asked for safety nets. He only asked for one more chance to fly, and in that he found glory and heartbreak. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you rethink what courage looks like, please like this video and subscribe. We tell true stories of those who pushed past pain and redefined the human spirit. Until next time, ride bold, live true, and never stop chasing the sky.